Look, listen. I know you're random, right? But just listen. Just hear me for a minute. Just listen for a minute. All right? Just listen. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Random Thoughts and Ideas with Jack. I am your guy, Jack, and this is a podcast about just random thoughts and ideas about everything and everyday life, concepts, mental health, relationships, whether it be romantic or family, and also a place to get some life saving or money saving DIY tips. So I want to encourage you guys to like, subscribe, and even comment. Comment on any thoughts, any ideas that you might have heard, like or dislike, any tips, any questions you might have. Just shoot them in the comments. Remember, you can find me on all of my handles. You go to my anchor page, you can find it. My handles on YouTube, Instagram, are RTI with Jack. So listen up, listen in, and enjoy. Okay, guys. So today's episode is about peer pressure and trauma. There are things that we acknowledge and don't acknowledge. Um, and in the realm of these two topics, I think they mold or play a very important role in molding who we are and our characters in today's world. Now, before I get any deeper into that, I want to share with you a few things that I do that has helped me a lot in becoming a better person, a better citizen, and it has a lot to do indirectly with trauma and peer pressure. And it's something I started a very long time ago when I was probably at the age of 16, and I still do it today. It has helped me through some extremely hard times, some extremely volatile times in my life, and I hope maybe that I can help someone else. So one of the first things that I do is I do a lot of introspection. I think about um, things that I have done, things that I want to do, how I react to things, how things affect me. And the reason why all this started is there were times in my life I was going through some difficult aspects, just like anyone else, teenage years, and sometimes they were overwhelming, and then sometimes I'll be in my bed at night and I can't sleep because something is bothering me, and sometimes I wouldn't even know what it was that was bothering me. So I started like sitting down and just thinking about everything and slowly eliminating what was the cause of how I was feeling at the time. Now, over time, it got easier and easier. And two things happened. Firstly, it was easier to identify what was bothering me, and then throughout the process of me there, when things happen that could automatically result in me being up at night and not being able to sleep because things were bothering me, it allowed me to identify things and address them at that time. So then later on in the night, they wouldn't bother me. So introspection has been a very good tool I've used and through my most of my adult life, and it also um, morphed into an annual introspection. So every year on my birthday, I spend some time alone, a few hours, where I think about what have I done and achieved the year. What do we want to achieve the year coming? The things that were the highlights and the low points, what I have learned and what I continue to fall short of. So that's one of the things I do. The second thing I do is that I do a lot of meditation. And this came about formally within the past 3 or 4 years, but even around the same age of 16, I realized that what I was doing is partial meditation. I would sit with myself and just talk to myself, not look crazy like it's sitting on a rock. See somebody pass me, and see me talking to myself, think I'm crazy. But sometimes it would be verbally, sometimes it would be all in my head. Like what going on with you, what you want in life, what bothering you was my focus, you know, ask for guidance. And that has morphed into a more formal sort of meditation where I sit, I do breathing exercises, I relax my body, I clear my mind, and I just go from there. But as a time for another chat, I guess I could do a episode on meditation, different types of meditation, and the benefits of meditation. But it is important that one takes time for themselves and spend times with themselves. Um, I have friends that used to ask me if I'm crazy because I would do things like go to the cinema and watch a movie alone. And that would be great. I would go out, I could go to a bar or just go to the beach and sit down by myself and be very cool and good with that. Be happy with it. And a lot of people, I realize that a lot of people can't understand that. And I am at that point because of meditation and introspection. So I am very comfortable with being me. I'm very comfortable with being alone, um, because there's no friction there in my mental space. So that's something you can look into if you need it, or if you do it already. There's someone else out there that does the same thing you do, so you're not crazy by yourself. All right. So today I want to look at something called peer pressure, and I want to talk about trauma as well. Now, a few days ago, like over a week ago, I was thinking about this thing called peer pressure. And funny enough, I was on Twitter and this space came up and the title was peer pressure. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting. So I listened in and it was a professional psychologist speaking about peer pressure. And then everyone was talking about their examples or their experiences with peer pressure. But I had a totally different idea of peer pressure that wasn't being mentioned. But for some reason, I didn't speak. I just listened, right? Which is also a very good quality sometimes. Just listen. So before I tell you that part, or go deeper into it, I just want to give you a few definitions by the professionals of what peer pressure is and what trauma is. So according to a few dictionaries, peer pressure is influence from members or of one's peer group. So people that are close to you, around your level, whether it be professional, personal, friends, that stuff, influence from them is considered peer pressure. Now, peer pressure is not necessarily negative. There is something called positive peer pressure. So, but is the idea of being influenced by um, your peers. So there are different forms and different types of peer pressure. There's spoken peer pressure, there's unspoken peer pressure, there's direct peer pressure, and there's indirect peer pressure. So and that's self-explanatory. So there are some causes that are there some reasons why people give in to peer pressure, or there are effects to peer pressure. So there's some people that would give in to peer pressure because of weak personality, because of fear of rejection. They want to be socially accepted, to avoid being bullied, to improve their coolness or social standard, or um, they want to be liked by everyone. Sometimes it could be hormonal reasons, or it could be as a result of bad parenting. So generally, we look at the negative stuff. Um, I'm gonna do both today, negative and positive. I know we always hear that peer pressure starts at school and peer pressure starts with your friends at home. But it got different. I have a different aspect of it. Now, before I even go deeper, I needed to be clear on that word peer, P-W-E-R, peer, because we always hear peer and we automatically think friends, school, whatever. So when I research the word peer, I was a peer group, and or rather the definition of peer. Peer is someone on the same level as you or a social group. It's like the same level as me or a social group. So I think of my friends, my schoolmates. But then when I hear the word social group, that makes it a bit more vague, right? A bit more vast. There are so many different social groups. So then when I do look at the definition of what a social group is, this is what hit home for me. This is what put it on the same level of thinking that I was at when I was thinking about this peer pressure. So a social group, and examples of social group is family, company you keep, circle of friends, clubs, chapters, fraternities, and sororities, right? So my level of thinking is that first example, family. And I want to say that I think that we ignore this fact or we don't recognize or identify this fact. And the fact is that our first experience with peer pressure starts in our family. And we might not acknowledge it because we may be too young to notice or too young to understand it. But our first peer pressure experience started with our family. And for varied and a different set of reasons. For instance, example, you grew up and your mother doesn't speak to this neighbor. So you in turn don't speak to that neighbor because you want to be accepted by your family. Or your family, this side of the family doesn't speak or interact with this side of the family. And when you do it, it's frowned upon. And you automatically fall back because you pick up the emotional distress or the emotional friction. So you fall back into your comfort zone, which is your family. Also, your family could be pressuring you into doing things. Our parents pressure us to do the things with the guys or the idea that it is what they want for us or is the best thing for us or is the way we should be raised. And I'm saying that it can be good, but it can also be very bad because it is subjective. So it is this person's idea. And then some of the things that I remember my mother saying to me that was peer pressure, and they saw it as positive peer pressure, but now looking back was very negative. Like for instance, the idea when you left this house, make sure you look decent, make sure you look if you got an owner. And at my young age, I was like, oh no, okay, cool, look decent. But now looking back at 37 years old, a owner is a slave. I mean, an owner who owned me. It, so psychologically, in my mind, I couldn't understand that. But now I get older, looking back at it, I was like, wow, a lot of the things that were said, our parents said back then, were as a result of repetition. They told you because they were told. They were told because who told them were told by their parents, and it goes all the way back to slavery. So a lot of things were just said and done out of repetition. The idea that it happened to me, so it should happen to you, or this is how I went through it, so this is what I know, and this is how I know how to teach you it. So bringing all that back to peer pressure, a lot of things that were forced on us or we were influenced to do or influenced by originated with our family. That's the idea I have on peer pressure. I can go a lot deeper into it, but I know that can be a very long episode. And then the next part of it I want to discuss is trauma. Now this is something that I don't want to say is a new concept to me, but it's something that I have been thinking about a lot. Probably say the past 3 years or so, for different various reasons in my life. And trauma is defined as an emotional response to a event or a traumatic event. For example, an accident, rape, a disaster, natural or man-made disaster. So it is the emotional response to a traumatic or significant event. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So the different types of trauma. There's acute trauma. Acute is that emotional response to a single event. There's chronic trauma, where there's an emotional response to a repeated or prolonged event, right? And there's a complex trauma, where is an emotional response to well, it's basically a combination. So, an emotional response to a repeated or prolonged event, or domestic abuse, for example. So, it's repeated in different forms and is for a long period of time. So, I was thinking, so what is the effects of trauma? And some of the effects or side effects of trauma is exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, dissociation, physical arousal, and a blunting effect. And when you look at these two things, they may seem very distinct, or you might not automatically get a connection between the two. But there's a connection. Peer pressure, one of the effects or the reasons for peer pressure I mentioned before, is wanting to fit in, or the fear of being bullied, or wanting to be accepted. Now, trauma, in my mind, is a result of something, right? And peer pressure occurs as a result of something as well. And I want to say that peer pressure can also be the result of trauma, because trauma is an emotional response. The causes of peer pressure are emotional responses. So I want to be accepted, that's emotional. I want not to be bullied, that's emotional, because fear is an emotion. I want to raise my social standard and acceptance, that's emotional. That's an intrinsic value, right? And if I can combine those two, and then in my thoughts, trauma and peer pressure originated in our interactions with our peers, and our peers is inclusive of our social group, and one of our social groups is family. The first ever social group that you would come and interact with or come into contact with is your family. And a lot of people are walking around with trauma as a result of family issues, which is general, which is normal, but there are very small things that we don't recognize as trauma, and we don't recognize as peer pressure. And they form our personalities, and we don't understand why. And if we don't understand them, then we can't move forward. And if we can't identify them, then we will continue to do them. So you're saying, what the hell is this man talking about? So I realized in my life, in my social and family circles, and friends as well, friends is social, I have triggers. And I never really realized them as triggers until I realized that I did not like how I felt when certain things were said and done to me. And then when I sat and thought about it, why do I react this way? Or why do I have this thought when I hear this expression? And it goes back to interactions with my mother or my brother. I grew up with my mother and my brother. And I had to acknowledge that this was happening because of this. And I can give you an example, not to be so cryptic. I do not like when someone comes and says to me, I am going to send you this place, or you can do this for me. That for me is a trigger. After you say that to me, I will hear nothing more you were saying afterwards. Because in my mind, that's something I grew up with and I hated because it was an emotional response of being or feeling that I had no control over this particular situation. So maybe they'll tell me I can say to you short or I can make you do this for me, I can make you do that for me, which meant I had no choice and to be honest, I had no choice. So now that I'm an adult and I hear that, it sends me right back there, right? Of this feeling of hopelessness or this feeling of not having control. And it triggers me. And for a long time I was just ignore the person. By the time you say that to me, I have no idea what you said afterwards. I just zone right out. And after a while I realized that that might not have been the best response. But because I never acknowledged it or I never realized that it was a trigger, that's what it was. So through discussions, I realized, yo, this is something that's triggering me because I don't like how I feel when I hear it. So what I do now is that when I hear it, I actually stop the person speaking. I say, can you rephrase that for me, please? Or you sending me? I repeat it to them so they can hear it for themselves. And then usually they would get where I'm coming from and restructure it and ask me. I would like to know if you will do this for me or could you do this for me or whatever. And then another trigger I have um, is lead up questions where somebody will ask you a question. What are you doing today? Are you busy tomorrow? Are you busy now? And then you answer it. Then they trick you. Then they say, well, it says you're doing nothing. Can't do the same for me. But I may not want to do it. Or I may not be able to do it. Or because in your mind, I'm not doing anything, does not mean that I'm available to you. I may not be doing anything in your perspective, but sometimes doing nothing is doing something for me. Right? So I don't like lead up questions because it then again puts me in a position of being manipulated. It puts me in a position where I have declared my hand, you have not declared your hand. So now you think that it's okay since I am, or you deem it that I meet the criteria for whatever it is you want, that I am to do it. So I don't let lead up questions. So when I get lead up questions, my mind is switch. And I just get defensive. So I just say, what do you want? You busy tomorrow? What do you want? You could do no. What do you want? So I realized that that response was a little too aggressive. What I will do now is that you busy tomorrow? It depends. I mean, it depends. It depends on what you want, and it's come off as a joke, but really and truly, sometimes that's the best way to treat the things until you can find a better way to deal with it. So I avoid um, being aggressive by being jokey because I do not like lead up questions. I don't like to be cornered into a decision where I can't have the option to decide if you're doing this thing or not. And believe it or not, some people believe that they have the right to dictate what you do with your time and how you feel. So I acknowledge those two things as triggers. And I treat to them or I'm working on treating with them. And sometimes it's part of my meditation. I put in my mind what it is that I want to improve. And I breathe, I relax, I clear my mind, and I just focus on different ways to let that be resolved, right? And sometimes it come to you the same time, sometimes it's come to you afterwards. But there are ways to treat with it. So what you want to say is that it's important to acknowledge what and how you feel about certain things. And then when you find yourself in situations, it gets easier when you can't figure out what you feel, how you feel. When you can't figure out what you feel, how you feel. And I'm saying that to do that, you have to be able to identify what the issue is. You have to be able to think back, meditate on it, if you don't want to use that term, to sit and really think and think and think and have a discussion with yourself about where you at, how you act, where you respond, how you respond to things, and what you feel, how you feel to certain things. And there might be triggers. And I want to say to you that these triggers, I'm not excluding that the fact that you can get peer pressure and trauma from your friends, from your relationships, romantic relationships, from work or work colleagues. But I want to propose to you that it is very, very possible, it is very, very likely that your first experience with trauma and your first experience with peer pressure happened with your family, your close family, people you live with, whether it be your mother, brother, father, cousins, whatever you grew up with, your family were those first people that you experience peer pressure from or with, and you experience your first interactions and your first experiences of trauma. Now, I've identified, in my view, the correlation between trauma and peer pressure. Also, in my view, the origins or our first interactions with these two things. I even give you the dictionaries and the psychologists' explanation of what is trauma, what is peer pressure, some of the causes and the types and whatever. So it's one thing to have information, but information without action is useless. And the action I want to inspire you to do today is to take a few minutes out anytime in the week. If you want to do it once a day, once a week, once a month, to take a little time and sit with yourself and analyze how you feel in general. Or if you are in a conversation or in a relationship and something happens or something is said and it automatically triggers a reaction from you, if you can stop the reaction just for a minute and think, I want to encourage you to just think about where you react, how you react to things, certain things, and try to trace it back to a single event when it first started. And you might be surprised. You might be surprised that things that you're reacting to in your relationships, whether it be a romantic relationship or a friendship relationship, are based in something that has nothing to do with them. Something that happened to you years ago when you was a child, or something that happened to you in another relationship, or something that happened to you, or something you saw that was so traumatic that it saved in your mind an automatic response. And I want to reinforce this thing. Trauma is defined as an emotional response to an event, to a series of events, to prolonged events, a traumatic event. Peer pressure is influenced by your peers. Your peers also include your social groups. And I want to say to you, in that definition of a social group, at the top of the list of that social group definition is family. So the reason why I'm pushing on this is to say that we don't generally think of a family as a social group. We don't think of family as social peers. We don't think of family when we think peer pressure, generally. And I want to say that the causes, by the definition of the psychologist, of trauma is emotional. And also, the causes for peer pressure, the things that result in people falling into peer pressure or giving into peer pressure, is also emotional. It says the feeling of wanting to fit in, emotional. The fear of not being bullied. The fear of being bullied, emotional. The want or the requirement or the need to fit into a social group or to raise your social standing, which is an intrinsic value, which is a personal feeling, a personal want. So trauma and peer pressure are not as far from each other as we might think. Trauma and peer pressure are results of an emotional event or a series of events or an emotional want. And if we look at them this way, sometimes it may make things clearer to us or for us. So I hope that this has at least sparked a different idea in your mind. I hope that this has helped you to look at it a little bit different or reinforce something that you believed in. If that has, thank you very much. If it hasn't, thank you as well for listening. I want to encourage you again to like, subscribe, also to comment. Your comments are very valuable because it lets me know how you feel, what you think, and it helps me to make, to better the podcast or to even address some things that you might want addressed. And I have no problem with that. So thank you again. You'll be listening to RTI with Jack, random thoughts and ideas with Jack. I done know. I say what I had to say. I share my random thought with you. Tell me what you think, man. Tell me what you think. Make sense?